He was just another face in the crowd, one of thousands of government contractors sitting in a sterile cubicle staring at a screen. His name was Edward Snowden. To his colleagues, he was a quiet, brilliant tech guy. But Snowden was different. He wasn't just fixing bugs. This is his so. And waiting. Inside a sprawling NSA facility in Hawaii, Snowden worked for Booz Allen Hamilton, trusted with the keys to the kingdom. He saw a system turning its gaze inward, collecting everything, every email, every call, without a warrant. For Snowden, there was only one choice: expose the truth, no matter the cost. The act was audacious. A digital heist for information, not gold. Snowden used his access to download classified documents, exposing secret programs like PRISM and XKEYSCORE. He smuggled data out, covered his tracks, and left everything behind. In June 2013, the world learned his name, Edward Snowden. The first revelation was a shockwave. The second was a tsunami. Day after day, new stories emerged from the documents Snowden provided. The existence of PRISM confirmed the public's worst fears about Silicon Valley's complicity with government surveillance. The scope of XKEYSCORE showed that an analyst could, with a few clicks, read the private emails of nearly anyone. It wasn't just about terrorism. The NSA was spying on allied world leaders, tapping the personal cell phone of German Chancellor Angela Merkel. It was monitoring financial transactions, tracking social media, and intercepting communications from the vast undersea fiber optic cables that formed the backbone of the internet. The reaction from the United States government was swift and furious. Officials scrambled to do damage control, first denying the programs existed, then downplaying their scope, and finally defending them as essential for national security. President Barack Obama found himself in the uncomfortable position of defending policies that seemed to contradict the very principles of privacy and liberty he had once championed. The Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, was accused of lying to Congress under oath. The carefully constructed wall of secrecy that protected the intelligence community for decades had been shattered into a million pieces. The hunt for the man responsible was on. The story exploded into a global phenomenon. Snowden was no longer a faceless source. He was the most wanted man on the planet. The United States Department of Justice charged him under the Espionage Act, a draconian law from 1917 designed to prosecute spies, not whistleblowers. An international manhunt was launched with the full weight of American diplomatic and intelligence power brought to bear. They pressured Hong Kong to extradite him. They wanted him silenced. But Snowden had one more card to play, and with his passport about to be cancelled, he slipped out of Hong Kong and boarded a flight to Moscow, beginning the next, even more dramatic chapter of his escape. The world was forced to pick a side. Was Edward Snowden a traitor who had endangered national security and betrayed his country's trust? Or was he a hero who had risked his own freedom to inform the public about a government that overstepped its bounds? The debate raged in newsrooms, parliaments, and living rooms across the globe. His actions triggered a worldwide reckoning over the balance between security and privacy in the digital age. He had exposed the truth, but in doing so, he had ignited a firestorm that would follow him across continents, turning his personal escape into a geopolitical crisis of historic proportions. Edward Snowden grew up in a patriotic American family, his father a Coast Guard officer and his mother a court clerk. Raised in Maryland near Fort Meade, Snowden was drawn to computers and the internet, teaching himself programming and exploring online worlds. His blend of patriotism and digital curiosity set the stage for his future as a whistleblower. After 9/11, I felt a duty to serve my country. I joined the Army Reserves, aiming for special forces. But a training accident ended my military career. My desire to serve remained. If not with a rifle, then with a keyboard. My computer skills led me to the CIA, where I became a trusted insider, until Geneva, where my faith in the system began to crack. Snowden's genius was his passport. While others climbed the ladder, my command of network security propelled me into the heart of US intelligence. As a contractor, I gained a root access, God mode, at the NSA. I was trusted, unseen, and could see everything. The perfect ghost in the machine. Working inside the intelligence world, I witnessed troubling methods and a culture where the ends justified the means. Discovering mass surveillance programs like PRISM and XKEYSCORE, I realized the public had been misled. The weight of this knowledge grew unbearable. The seed of doubt became conviction. I had to act. The whistleblower was about to be born. When I joined the Booz Allen Hamilton in Hawaii, I became a systems administrator with the NSA, one of the few trusted with the keys to the kingdom. I had root access to servers holding the nation's secrets, able to see the raw data of global surveillance. With programs like XKEYSCORE, I could search vast databases with just a name or email, and the tools meant to protect secrets became the instruments I used to reveal them to the world. My data collection was a solitary mission, conceived, executed, and hidden by me alone. No collaborators, no confidants. Every keystroke was a risk, every download a potential alarm. I relied on my technical expertise and nerve, operating in total secrecy, a lone figure against a global intelligence empire. Smuggling millions of classified files out of a high-security NSA facility is a monumental challenge. It's not as simple as just walking out with a laptop. Every person and item entering or leaving such a building is subject to search. Digital media is especially scrutinized. I knew I couldn't just plug in a standard USB stick and download terabytes of data without triggering immediate alerts. The system was designed to detect large, unauthorized data transfers, so I had to be clever, breaking the data into smaller, more manageable chunks, and using methods that would fly under the radar of both human guards and digital security systems. My approach was, honestly, a masterclass in low-tech ingenuity and social engineering. I reportedly used multiple small encrypted micro SD cards, the tiny memory chips used in phones and cameras. These are minuscule and easy to conceal. To get them past physical security, I sometimes hid them in plain sight, using a Rubik's Cube as a concealment device. A guard might glance at the colorful puzzle, a common desk toy for tech-savvy individuals, and think nothing of it. It was a brilliant piece of misdirection, using a symbol of complexity and intelligence to hide my own complex and intelligent operation. I was banking on the power of the mundane, knowing that security often looks for the overtly suspicious while overlooking the seemingly ordinary. The technical side of the transfer was just as clever. Instead of performing one massive download, I likely siphoned the data over a period of time, using my administrator privileges to make the transfers look like routine system backups or diagnostic data collection. I would have carefully scrubbed the server logs to erase my footprints, or created so much digital noise that my specific actions would be lost in the chaos. I was essentially using the NSA's own complexity against it. The sheer volume of data flowing through the agency systems every second provided the perfect camouflage for my own exfiltration of highly classified documents. I was a needle, hiding in a stack of needles. This meticulous process demonstrates that I was not an impulsive actor, but a deliberate and calculating planner. I had thought through every step, from the initial access to the final exfiltration. I understood both the digital architecture and the human psychology of the security environment I was operating in. The Rubik's Cube, whether literal or a metaphor for my methods, perfectly encapsulates my strategy. And complex problem solved with an elegant, unexpected solution. I wasn't just a hacker, I was a magician, and my greatest trick was making 1.7 million secret documents disappear from the most secure rooms on Earth. Living a double life took a profound psychological toll. To the outside world, especially to his friends and girlfriends, Snowden's behavior in the months leading up to his departure became increasingly distant and focused. What they likely interpreted as stress from a demadzag, didimi mansan, deciding, job, was in reality the intense pressure of his secret mission. And he was building a wall around himself, not out of malice, but for their protection and his own. He couldn't risk a slip of the tongue or an unguarded moment that might reveal the truth. This forced him into a state of self-imposed isolation, making him a stranger even to those closest to him. Friends who spoke out after the revelations described the man who had become more withdrawn and serious. The light-hearted tech enthusiast was being replaced by someone more intense, more preoccupied. They noted a change in his demeanor, a quiet paranoia that was both palpable and, in hindsight, completely rational. He was known to take security precautions that seemed excessive at the time, such as asking friends to place their cell phones in the refrigerator to block any potential eavesdropping. To them, it might have seemed like an odd quirk, Igor being a security-conscious tech guy. To him, it was a necessary, a defense against a surveillance apparatus he knew was all-seeing. This paranoia was not a sign of mental instability, but a logical consequence of his knowledge. Knew better than anyone what the United States government was capable of. He had seen the tools, he had read the reports, he understood the reach of the intelligence community. He was living inside the panopticon, and he knew its gaze could turn on him at any moment. This knowledge would have made normal life feel like a performance. Every interaction a calculated risk. He was carrying a secret that was not only life-changing for him, but had the potential to alter the course of global politics. A burden that would make anyone seem distant and focused. This period of his life was a crucible, forging the whistleblower who would soon shock the world. The intense focus and rational paranoia were survival mechanisms. He had to be smarter, more careful, and more disciplined than the organization he was challenging. His emotional distance was a firewall, protecting his mission and the people he loved from the fallout he knew was coming. He was a man walking a tightrope, and the only way to keep his balance was to look straight ahead, never glancing down at the life he was about to leave behind forever. Snowden's secrecy cost him dearly, especially with his girlfriend Lindsay Mills. She had no idea he was orchestrating the biggest intelligence leak in history. He kept her and his family in the dark to protect them, but the shock and betrayal were immense. His personal sacrifice was the price for revealing the truth. From his perch inside the NSA's Hawaiian Operations Center, Edward Snowden saw the architecture of modern surveillance. It was a sprawling, interconnected machine for mass, indiscriminate collection. Programs like PRISM and XKEYSCORE accessed data directly from tech giants. Snowden realized the potential for abuse was limitless. It was a fundamental violation of human rights. My actions weren't about fame or revenge. I simply couldn't accept a world where everything I do and say is recorded. Privacy is the foundation of freedom, where creativity and dissent can flourish. Constant surveillance is an existential threat to democracy. I felt a higher loyalty to the public and the Constitution and was willing to sacrifice my freedom to spark a debate about everyone else's. In my quest for a greater good, I engaged in calculated betrayals. I betrayed the trust of the NSA, CIA, and Booz Allen Hamilton. I signed non-disclosure agreements and swore oaths to protect secrets. My actions were seen as the ultimate insider threat. I used my access to dismantle secrecy. This was a conscious choice. I argued my oath was to the Constitution. This betrayal extended to my colleagues. They trusted me as a team member. My actions led to stricter security measures. I turned our workspace into the scene of my crime. The fallout affected the entire intelligence community. I knew this would be a consequence. Most painfully, I betrayed my own inner circle. To protect them, I had to deceive them. While my girlfriend and family were unaware of my plans, I allowed them to believe my life was ordinary. This decision was a profound breach of personal trust. I made a choice that detonated their lives. It was a deeply personal sacrifice. Ultimately, I saw these betrayals as necessary. I weighed the trust of my employers, colleagues, and family against the government's betrayal. In my moral calculus, the latter was a greater crime. I chose to break my promises, to expose a broken promise to billions. It was a choice that defined me, blurring the lines between loyalty and treachery. My escape began quietly. On May 20th, 2013, I left my home in Waipahu, Hawaii, and my unsuspecting girlfriend behind. I told the NSA I needed medical leave, but packed 4 laptops with encrypted secrets instead. My destination, Hong Kong. There was no going back. The clock was ticking. Upon landing in the vibrant, chaotic metropolis of Hong Kong, Snowden immediately went to ground. He checked into the Mira Hotel, a luxury establishment in the bustling Tsim Sha Tsui district, a place where he could blend in among the throngs of tourists and business travelers. His first days were a whirlwind of encrypted communication and extreme caution. He knew that as soon as the first story broke, he would become the most hunted man on the planet. From the confines of his hotel room, which he reportedly lined with pillows against the door to muffle sound and covered his head with a blanket when typing passwords, he began the delicate process of making contact with his chosen journalists. He had already established encrypted channels with documentary filmmaker Laura Poitras and journalist Glenn Greenwald of The Guardian. Poitras was the first to meet him in Hong Kong. Greenwald soon followed. The initial meeting was tense. They were meeting a source known only by the pseudonym Verax, meaning truth teller. They had no idea who he was or if he could be trusted. When they finally met in his hotel room, they were confronted not by a seasoned intelligence veteran, but by a pale Yuxigan Dixon's a nervous 29-year-old. Over the course of several days, Snowden methodically and calmly laid out the proof in decrypting documents and explaining the intricate workings of programs like PRISM and XKEYSCORE. The decision to work with journalists rather than just dumping the documents online was a crucial part of his strategy. Snowden did not want to be the one to decide what was in the public interest and what might genuinely harm national security. He entrusted Greenwald and Poitras with the raw data tasking them with the journalistic responsibility of vetting the material, redacting sensitive information like the names of covert agents, and reporting the stories responsibly. He saw himself not as an arbiter of truth, but as a source, an enabler of a public debate that he believed was long overdue. He was handing the keys to the kingdom over to the Fourth Estate. On June 5, 2013, the gambit paid off. The Guardian published the first bombshell report revealing a top-secret court order compelling Verizon to hand over the telephone metadata of millions of Americans to the NSA. The next day, The Guardian and The Washington Post jointly published the story of PRISM. The world was stunned. The carefully constructed wall of secrecy around the NSA began to crumble. Snowden, still anonymous, is successfully lit regress. It is in 60 days. In the day PC is I see this they sent to use from his Hong Kong hotel room. The revelations were out and they were irreversible. He had won the first battle, but the war for his own freedom was just beginning, right? The moment the stories hit the press, the full power of the US government was unleashed. President Obama and intelligence officials scrambled to contain the fallout. The FBI launched a manhunt for the source, Edward Snowden. On June 9th, Snowden revealed his identity, telling the world, "I don't want to live in a society that does these sort of things." He became the world's most famous fugitive as the US moved to trap him in Hong Kong. With the world watching, Snowden's escape was about to enter its next dramatic phase. With his passport about to be cancelled, Snowden made a desperate escape from Hong Kong, guided by WikiLeaks' Sarah Harrison. Boarding Aeroflot flight SU-213 to Moscow, he became a man without a country. His passport voided mid-air. The world watched as the US scrambled to block his path, but Snowden's journey had only just begun, flying into an uncertain future. When Aeroflot flight SU-213 landed at Sheremetyevo, my plans unraveled. Cuba denied me entry, my US passport was cancelled, and I was trapped in the airport's transit zone, stateless in limbo. For 39 days, I lived in a capsule hotel, surviving on airport food, as the world watched and governments played a high-stakes game over my fate. As I languished in the transit zone, the situation transformed into a high-stakes standoff between Washington and Moscow. Vladimir Putin masterfully controlled the narrative. He publicly stated I was free to go, a statement dripping with diplomatic irony. Putin knew full well that I could go nowhere. He presented Russia as a neutral party trapped by circumstance, all while enjoying the spectacle of American frustration. It was a classic display of Russian political theater, asserting Moscow's power on the world stage. Putin laid out a single, crucial condition for any potential asylum in Russia. He declared that I could stay, but only if I agreed to stop any further activities that would harm our American partners. This was a clever and multifaceted move. On one hand, it allowed Putin to appear reasonable, as if he were trying to de-escalate the conflict with the US. On the other hand, it was a test for me, forcing me to choose between my whistleblowing mission and my personal freedom. It also put the US in an awkward position, as publicly accepting the deal would mean implicitly acknowledging that my leaks were, in fact, causing harm. The offer was a calculated gambit designed to give Russia the upper hand, no matter the outcome. Inside the airport, I convened a meeting with human rights activists and lawyers, my first public appearance since arriving in Moscow. From a makeshift podium, I announced my intention to formally apply for temporary asylum in Russia, stating it was my only option to secure my safety and travel to my intended destination in Latin America. I accused the U.S. government of accused EU of a campaign of persecution that was not only targeting me, but violating the rights of all people to seek asylum. I accepted Putin's condition, promising not to harm U.S. interests, a pledge open to interpretation, but one they served its immediate purpose. The decision was made. I would place my face in the Russian state. This move was a bitter pill for the US government to swallow. They had tried to isolate me and force me into submission, but their actions had inadvertently pushed me into the arms of one of their primary geopolitical adversaries. The prospect of the man who held the NSA's deepest secrets living under the protection of Moscow was a nightmare scenario for American intelligence agencies. They had lost control of the situation completely. I was no longer just a fugitive. I was now a symbol of the shifting global power dynamics, a human chess piece in a game played by presidents and intelligence services. The official asylum application created a diplomatic firestorm. Washington's outrage reached a fever pitch, with U.S. officials accusing Russia of deliberately providing a platform for a fugitive. They threatened consequences, hinting at boycotts of upcoming summits and a chilling of diplomatic relations. The rhetoric was heated, but their leverage was limited. Russia, for its part, calmly proceeded with its bureaucratic process, reviewing my application while publicly maintaining that it was a purely legal and humanitarian matter, not a political one. This pretense of following due process only further infuriated the US, which saw it as a thinly veiled act of geopolitical defiance. The manhunt had morphed into a full-blown diplomatic crisis. The standoff highlighted the deep-seated mistrust between the two former Cold War rivals. For the US, it was a matter of law and order. A fugitive charged under the Espionage Act needed to be returned to face justice. For Russia, it was a matter of national sovereignty and a chance to position itself as a bulwark against American unilateralism. Putin and his government delighted in lecturing the US on international law and human rights, turning America's own rhetoric back on itself. The deadlock became a symbol of a new multipolar world where US demands were no longer automatically met with compliance, even from nations with which it had complex and vital relationships. While the superpowers postured, I remained in my airport purgatory, my fate hanging in the balance. The 39 days I spent in Sheremetyevo were a period of intense global speculation and diplomatic maneuvering. Every day brought new rumors, new threats, and new often futile attempts by other nations to offer a solution. The world watched as the US intelligence machine, capable of monitoring the communications of billions, found itself utterly powerless to retrieve one man from an airport terminal in Moscow. It was a humbling and infuriating spectacle for the American government, a public demonstration of the limits of its power. Finally, on August 1st, 2013, the deadlock was broken. Russia officially granted me temporary asylum for 1 year. My lawyer escorted me out of a side exit of Sheremetyevo airport and into a waiting car, my location kept secret. I was free from the transit zone, but I was now an exile in Russia, a country I had never intended to visit, let alone live in. The global manhunt had not ended in my capture, but in a strategic defeat for the United States. I had escaped, but my freedom was a gilded cage, and my long frozen exile was just beginning. While Snowden was trapped in Sheremetyevo airport, a rumor spread he was secretly on Bolivian President Evo Morales' jet leaving Moscow. European nations, believing the story, closed their airspace. Morales' plane was forced to land, caught in a global hunt for Snowden. The incident shocked the world, breaking diplomatic protocol in pursuit of one man. With their planned route blocked and fuel running dangerously low, the pilots of President Morales' jet had no choice but to divert. They were forced to make an emergency landing at Vienna International Airport in Austria. The moment the plane touched down, it was surrounded by Austrian officials and security personnel. The pretext for the grounding was a technical suspicion that an unauthorized person was on board. It was a thinly veiled excuse. The Austrians, acting under immense pressure from the United States, were there to do one thing: to search the sovereign aircraft of a foreign president to find Edward Snowden. It was a moment of pure diplomatic theater, played out on the tarmac in Vienna. President Morales was furious. He vehemently denied that Snowden was on board and decried the action as a hostage-taking and an egregious violation of international law. For hours, a tense standoff ensued. The Bolivian president and his delegation refused to allow their plane to be searched, correctly arguing that it was sovereign Bolivian territory and immune from such actions. The Austrian authorities insisted, creating a diplomatic impasse that captured the world's attention. Then, the image of a democratically elected Latin American leader being grounded in Europe on the orders of the United States sent shockwaves across the globe, especially throughout South America, where it was viewed as an act of imperialist aggression. The situation grew more surreal when the Spanish ambassador to Austria reportedly arrived at the airport and demanded to board the plane for an inspection, claiming he wanted to have a coffee with President Morales. The request was, of course, denied. Finally, after hours of negotiation and international condemnation, President Morales, in a gesture to resolve the standoff, voluntarily allowed a cursory inspection of the plane, which confirmed what he had been saying all along. There was no sign of Edward Snowden. The world's most wanted man was not on board. He was, in fact, still back in Moscow, confined to the Sheremetyevo transit zone. The entire incident had been based on a false premise. The false trail had led to a dead end, but not before causing a significant international incident. The US and its European allies had been completely humiliated. They had grounded a head of state, violated diplomatic norms, and created a global firestorm, all for nothing. The botched operation revealed the sheer desperation and paranoia driving the manhunt. They were willing to bully and alienate allies and neutral countries alike in their single-minded pursuit. As President Morales' plane was finally cleared for takeoff after a 14-hour ordeal, it left behind a trail of diplomatic wreckage and simmering resentment that would not soon be forgotten. The fallout from the grounding of President Morales' plane was immediate and intense. In Latin America, outrage erupted. Leaders from across the political spectrum, from Venezuela's Nicolás Maduro to Argentina's Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, rallied in support of Morales. They condemned the incident not just as an insult to Bolivia, but as an attack on the sovereignty and dignity of the entire region. The Union of South American Nations, or UNASUR, convened an emergency summit, issuing a scathing denunciation of the unfriendly and unjustifiable acts by the European nations and demanding an explanation and an apology. The incident galvanized a sense of regional solidarity against what was perceived as American and European high-handedness. The European governments involved found themselves in an incredibly awkward position. They were forced to offer sheepish apologies and convoluted explanations, blaming miscommunications and technical errors. It was clear to everyone, however, that they had acted under direct pressure from Washington. This exposed the true power dynamics of the transatlantic alliance, showing that when the US intelligence community made a demand, its European partners were expected to fall in line. even if it meant violating fundamental principles of international law. The episode strained relationships and fostered a deep sense of mistrust, leaving European leaders looking like puppets of the United States on the world stage. For the United States, the incident was a public relations disaster. Their aggressive tactics had backfired spectacularly, turning Snowden from a simple fugitive into a symbol of resistance against American overreach. The heavy-handedness of the operation generated sympathy for Snowden's plight and bolstered the narrative that he was a persecuted truth-teller, not a criminal. The global backlash was so severe that it likely played a role in Russia's final decision to grant him temporary asylum a few weeks later. By trying to trap Snowden, the US had inadvertently made it politically easier for Russia to offer him protection, framing it as a stand against American bullying. Ultimately, the Morales affair was a crucial turning point. It demonstrated the incredible lengths to which the US government was willing to go to capture one man and the profound global chaos that pursuit was causing. The false trail had not led to Snowden, but it had exposed the raw nerves of international relations and the often unseen power the US wields over its allies. The manhunt was no longer just about a whistleblower. It had become a global referendum on American power in the 21st century. And in this particular battle, the US intelligence machine had been outmaneuvered and publicly shamed. Leaving Sheremetyevo Airport in 2013, I entered a new kind of confinement, free from US custody, but trapped within Russia's borders. My life became a secret, my location hidden, my movements watched, a pawn in a geopolitical game, protected yet never truly free. Exile meant trading one cage for another, living under constant surveillance, in a country I never chose, my fate tied to forces far beyond my control. Over time, I built a semblance of normalcy, reunited with Lindsay, married, and eventually raising a family in Moscow. I stayed active as a remote advocate, speaking out on privacy and surveillance, while my personal roots in Russia deepened. Gaining Russian citizenship was a practical step for my family's security, but it cemented my status as a Kurdish, a permanent outsider, no longer American, not truly Russian. Accusations of Russian collaboration have always followed me despite my denials and lack of evidence. My value to the Kremlin is symbolic, a living critique of American surveillance, yet I remain under their watchful eye, my freedom conditional. I exist in a paradox, a transparency advocate sheltered by a secretive state, my legacy forever complicated by the shadow of the Kremlin. The world remains divided. Some see me as a hero who exposed government overreach, others as a traitor who endangered national security. My actions forced a reckoning about power, secrecy, and individual conscience, but consensus remains elusive. I am a mirror for society's deepest anxieties about freedom and loyalty, my story a question with no easy answer. Whatever one thinks of me, the impact is clear. My disclosures transform global debates on privacy, technology, and surveillance. Laws changed, tech companies embraced encryption, and citizens became more aware, but the surveillance state endures. I didn't dismantle the system, but I made its existence undeniable, ensuring the world could never again claim ignorance. Edward Snowden's story is more than a debate about surveillance. It's a reflection of us. He forced us to ask, what is the price of security? How much privacy will we trade for convenience? Snowden's actions remind us that in a world always watching, the struggle for freedom is ongoing.